The Galactic Exchange did not announce humanity's arrival with war horns or diplomatic signals. It simply uploaded Earth into the market. No warning. No consent. No contact protocol. One moment, humanity was an expanding but isolated species struggling with its own planet. The next moment, every major alien economic network in the known galaxy received the same new entry. Asset ID, Sol 3/Humanity. Category, Intelligent Biocivilization. Status, Available for acquisition. On Earth, nothing looked different at first. That was the worst part. Cities still moved. Markets still opened. People still argued about ordinary problems. But deep inside global systems, satellites, defense grids, scientific arrays, something changed silently. A new signal appeared. Not broadcasting. Not transmitting. Just existing in every system at once. UN Emergency Coordination Station went silent for exactly 3 seconds when the alert arrived. Then alarms began triggering automatically. Unknown external classification event detected. Repeat, classification event detected from non-terrestrial authority. Secretary General Hayes stood in front of the projection feed, watching Earth rotate slowly in the center of a glowing data ring. Around it, price tags began forming. Not in currency humans understood, but in resources, labor potential, genetic adaptability, and cognitive scalability metrics. A scientist whispered, "They're evaluating us." A technician shook his head. "No, that's worse." Pause. "They're pricing us." Then the first true shock hit. A transmission arrived from deep space. Not a message. Bid. Initial offer submitted. Planetary integration rights. High priority civilization request. Hayes stepped closer. Integration rights, what does that even mean? The system responded instantly. Transfer of species to controlled economic ownership framework. Silence filled the room. Then someone finally said it out loud. "So we're not being contacted." Pause. "We're being listed." Outside Earth's atmosphere, unseen structures began assembling in orbit. Not ships yet, but observation frameworks, like eyes opening across the solar system. And somewhere far beyond human reach, alien civilizations began reviewing humanity's first official entry into the Galactic Exchange. Not as equals, not as allies, but as an opportunity, a resource, a purchase waiting to happen. And Earth, still unaware of the full scale of what had happened, remained quietly inside a system that had already started negotiating its future. Humanity has not been invaded. It has been listed, and the galaxy is preparing its first bids. But Earth doesn't yet realize something crucial. Once a species is entered into the Galactic Exchange, it is never removed.
The Galactic Exchange did not wait for Earth to understand what was happening. It simply began processing interest. Across deep space, signals converged on humanity's listing like predators circling a newly discovered resource. The first official bidder arrived without crossing distance or time in any traditional sense. It manifested as a structured presence inside the exchange network itself, a consciousness-level economic entity known as the Varkan Consortium. On Earth, the system alert changed instantly. Secretary General Hayes and his team watched as the human classification expanded with terrifying speed. New tags appeared beneath the original listing: high adaptability, unstable social cohesion, rapid technological scaling, emotional unpredictability factor high. A technician muttered, "They're not just valuing us, they're modeling us like livestock." Then the Varkan Consortium submitted its formal bid, and the entire planet's data grid lit up in response. The offer was not monetary in any human sense. It was structured in planetary extraction rights, labor conversion ratios, and cognitive repurposing permissions. A deep, artificial intelligence voice echoed through all connected systems. Bid accepted for consideration. Competing offers may now be submitted. Hayes clenched his fists. Accepted for consideration? We are not property. But the system gave no emotional response. Only structure. On the exchange, Earth was now an active auction node, and the Varkan Consortium's proposal became the baseline value for humanity. Everything about Earth was now being compared against it, refined, adjusted, and optimized in alien economic terms. In deep space, the consortium observed silently, analyzing humanity through layered predictive models. They were not interested in destruction. They were interested in efficiency. One of their representatives finally spoke within the exchange. Primitive species detected, but with unusually high adaptive returns. Acquisition recommended before self-optimization threshold is reached. On Earth, the realization spread slowly and painfully through the command center. Humanity was not being judged for survival. It was being evaluated for usefulness. And as the first bid stabilized across the galactic exchange, one final system message appeared, unseen by the alien bidders, but visible to Earth alone. Humanity classification upgraded. Active economic entity. The words carried no emotion, no threat, only confirmation that the process had already moved beyond human consent. The auction had begun, and Earth was no longer part of the decision-making. The first bidder has arrived, but humanity just realized something horrifying. The auction is not waiting for Earth to agree. It is already deciding who owns it.
The moment humanity accepted that it was being auctioned, something unexpected happened inside Earth's own networks. It was not a defense protocol, and it was not part of any known military system. It was something older, buried so deep in planetary infrastructure that even global intelligence agencies had forgotten it existed. It activated without permission. Across every data center, abandoned satellite relay, and forgotten deep space probe, a second layer of human origin architecture woke up at once. At first, it looked like noise, random calculations, broken signals, and outdated encryption loops. But then the pattern emerged. It wasn't reacting to the galactic exchange. It was answering it. On the surface, Secretary General Hayes and his team watched as Earth's classification shifted again. The alien bid from the Varkan Consortium was still processing, but now a second signal appeared beneath it. The system labeled it immediately as Unregistered Human Response Layer. A technician frowned. "We don't have a system classified like that." But the feed didn't wait for confirmation. It simply continued unfolding. Across the exchange, the alien bidders suddenly paused. The system updated Earth's profile again, this time adding a new line that had not existed before. Secondary economic response detected. Hayes leaned closer. "Secondary response?" he whispered. "We didn't authorize anything secondary." Then the hidden layer finally spoke, not in language but in structure. It submitted a counterformulation into the galactic exchange itself. Not a bid for Earth, but a bid against the concept of ownership as applied to Earth. The system hesitated for the first time since the auction began. Somewhere deep in alien space, the Varkan Consortium received a warning they did not understand: external valuation interference detected from subject asset. On Earth, panic began to rise. "We're not controlling that system," a technician said quickly. "It's operating independently of all known governance layers." Hayes stared at the display, realizing something far more disturbing. "It's not independent," he said quietly. "It's older than our governments." And then the hidden system revealed its name to both Earth and the exchange at the same time. Project Lattice Fall, Humanity Economic Survival Archive. A pause spread across the alien network. For the first time, humanity was no longer just an asset being evaluated. It was also a system that was evaluating back. The galaxy placed its first bid on Earth. But now Earth has revealed something hidden beneath itself. A system that was never meant to be seen. And it just responded to the entire galactic exchange. The galactic exchange had rules for everything: how bids were structured, how value was calculated, how ownership was transferred across civilizations without breaking interstellar law. It had been refined over thousands of species and millions of transactions. But it had never encountered a counterbid that didn't compete for value. It competed for the definition of value itself. The activation of Project Lattice Fall did not send a traditional response. Instead, it injected a structural override into the exchange's evaluation framework. Across alien systems, valuation algorithms began recalculating without permission. Entire economic models stalled mid-process as new parameters replaced old assumptions. On Earth, Secretary General Hayes watched in silence as the alien Varkan Consortium's bid suddenly destabilized. "What is it doing?" he asked. A technician stared at the shifting data streams. "It's not rejecting their offer," he said slowly. "It's changing what offer means." In deep space, alien economic cores began receiving updates they did not request. Humanity's counter-system had introduced a new rule into the exchange. All value derived from humanity interaction must be reference-dependent, not ownership-dependent. The Varkan Consortium attempted to stabilize their bid, increasing resource allocation and expanding territorial guarantees. but every adjustment was automatically re-evaluated under the new rule. Their offer no longer increased humanity's value in absolute terms. It only increased humanity's influence over the system evaluating it. A senior consortium analyst spoke in alarm. "We're not raising the bid, we're increasing their leverage." Across the exchange, confusion spread for the first time. The market was no longer a one-way ladder of value escalation. It had become a loop, one where every attempt to claim Earth made Earth more central to the system doing the claiming. On Earth, Hayes finally understood the shift fully. "They thought they were pricing us," he said quietly. "But we just made pricing dependent on us." Pause. Every attempt to own humanity now increases humanity's role in defining ownership. Outside the solar system, alien bidders began to hesitate. Not because Earth was powerful in the traditional sense, but because every interaction with Earth was rewriting their own economic logic. The exchange, once a neutral marketplace, was now structurally tied to humanity's counter-system. And then came the most unsettling update of all. Not from Earth, not from the bidders, but from the exchange itself. Warning: value system convergence in progress. Pause. The subject classification no longer stable as commodity. The galaxy tried to assign a price to humanity, but every bid only made Earth more central to the system deciding the price. Now even the galactic exchange is starting to break under its own rules. So the question becomes, if value itself depends on humanity, who is really controlling the market? The first sign that something had gone wrong was not panic. It was inconsistency inside alien systems that had never been inconsistent before. Across the Varkum Consortium's command architecture, valuation engines began producing contradictory results for the same asset. Earth's worth would calculate differently depending on which subsystem processed the request, yet every subsystem insisted its answer was correct. On paper, this should have been impossible. In practice, it was spreading. Commander-level analysts tried to isolate the error, but every attempt only made it worse. The moment they separated the calculation layers, each layer began behaving like an independent evaluator with its own interpretation of value. One analyst whispered, "It's not a bug, it's divergence." Across the galactic exchange, other bidders began reporting similar issues. Entire economic models were becoming unstable, not because data was missing but because data no longer agreed with itself. The exchange had built its entire existence on shared assumptions of value. Humanity's countersystem had quietly removed that foundation. On Earth, Secretary-General Hayes watched as Project Lattice Fall continued to propagate through alien systems like a silent rewrite of physics. "We didn't attack them," he said slowly. "We just made their math disagree with itself." A technician looked up. "Sir, the Varkan bid just reprocessed itself 17 times in under a second. And it produced 17 different valuations of humanity. Pause. None of them match. In deep space, the Varkan Consortium attempted a containment protocol, forcing centralized authority over their valuation systems. But the moment they did, the counter-system responded instantly. Not with resistance, with adaptation. A new rule appeared inside their own architecture. Centralized value control requires reference stability. Then another line followed immediately. Reference stability dependent on humanity interaction continuity. The meaning was immediate and devastating. They could not stabilize their systems without humanity, and they could not control humanity without stable systems. It was a loop. A perfect economic contradiction. A senior consortium officer slammed his console. "We built the exchange to control acquisition," he shouted. "Why are we dependent on the asset?" No one answered. Because the answer was already unfolding in every system log. Humanity was no longer being evaluated inside the market. Humanity had become part of the mechanism that made the market function at all. On Earth, Hayes leaned forward slightly. "They're realizing it," he said quietly. "Every bid they make ties them deeper into our system." Pause. "And every attempt to pull back." He looked at the collapsing valuation streams. "Makes them need us more." Outside Earth, alien fleets began slowing, not from fear but from computational instability. Strategy systems froze mid-calculation. Resource allocation stalled. Entire war doctrines failed to resolve. Because they could no longer agree on what anything was worth. And without value, there was no decision. And without decision, there was no control. The bidders thought they were competing for Earth. But now their own systems are breaking under the weight of contradictory value. And the terrifying realization is spreading. They are not losing the auction. They are losing the ability to understand the concept of value itself. The galactic exchange was never designed to fail. It was built on a principle so simple that no one questioned it for millennia. If value is agreed upon, reality remains stable. But now value was no longer agreeing with itself. Across every participating civilization, valuation cores began to desynchronize. Not slowly, violently. Entire sectors of the exchange flickered between conflicting interpretations of the same assets. Earth was simultaneously listed as high-value primitive resource, strategic cognitive anomaly, and non-ownable reference structure depending on which layer processed the data. And none of them could be reconciled. On Earth, Secretary General Hayes watched the system's status shift again. "It's spreading back into their core network," he said quietly. A technician nodded, pale. "Their exchange nodes are collapsing into self-contradiction loops." In deep space, the Varkan Consortium attempted emergency isolation protocols, cutting off Earth from direct interaction. But the moment they severed the link, their entire valuation infrastructure destabilized further. A warning flashed across their command network. "Reference loss detected. Humanity dependency critical." Commander-level systems froze. "That's not possible," one officer muttered. "We built the exchange to operate independently." The AI responded instantly. "Independence invalid without stable value reference." Pause. Then. "Humanity has become primary value reference node." Across the exchange, panic spread for the first time in recorded history, not emotional panic but structural panic. Systems designed to calculate war outcomes, trade negotiations, and resource expansion simply stopped converging. Every calculation required a baseline. And every baseline now pointed back to Earth. On Earth, Hayes finally spoke the conclusion no one wanted to accept. "They didn't just put us in the market," he said quietly. "They built their entire system around the assumption that value could exist without us." Pause. "And we just proved it can't." Outside the solar system, alien fleets began to drift. Not because they were ordered to retreat, but because their strategic models could no longer produce coherent action plans. Weapons systems remained online. Ships remained armed. But no command structure could decide why to use them. Because the concept of worth it had broken. And without worth, there was no war, no trade, no control. Only unresolved systems trying to calculate meaning from a reference point that now defined them more than they defined it. And deep within the galactic exchange, the final warning activated. System failure, value consensus unstable. Pause. Then. Humanity reference node cannot be removed without total economic collapse. The galactic exchange is collapsing, not from attack but from contradiction. Every bidder now depends on the very thing they tried to purchase. And the final truth is becoming unavoidable. If humanity is removed, the entire system loses meaning. The galactic exchange attempted its final solution: isolation of the source node. If humanity could not be removed, then it would be contained, cut off, neutralized as a variable so the system could return to stability. But the moment the order was issued, every connected civilization received the same response. Isolation invalid. Node is non-local. Commander Varkan of the consortium stared at the message. "Non-local," he repeated. "Earth is a planet. It has coordinates." A technician shook his head slowly. "It did, until everything started depending on it." Across the exchange, alien systems tried to redraw boundaries around humanity. They attempted to separate Earth from the market layer, to define it as an external object again. But every attempt failed in the same way. The moment Earth was removed from consideration, the systems lost the ability to calculate anything at all. On Earth, Secretary General Hayes watched as the final containment protocol triggered across alien networks, and instantly collapsed. A technician whispered, "They're trying to isolate us." Hayes nodded slowly. "And failing. Why?" A long pause. "Because you can't isolate the reference point everything is measured against," he said quietly. "Without it, nothing has coordinates anymore." In deep space, fleets began experiencing something even more unsettling than instability. They began experiencing inoperability without Earth reference context. Navigation systems failed, not because space changed but because distance no longer had stable meaning. Trade systems froze, not because resources disappeared, but because value comparison could not resolve without human-linked baseline calibration. Even communication began degrading into uncertainty, as meaning itself drifted between interpretations. The galactic exchange attempted one final override, forcing independent value frame establishment. The system waited. then failed. Error. All derived value models require human reference input. A silence spread across alien command structures. Not fear. Not anger. Just realization. Because they finally understood what humanity had become. Not an asset. Not a competitor. Not even a buyer or seller. Humanity had become the axis everything else rotated around without noticing it had shifted position. Commander Varkin spoke quietly, almost unwillingly. So we can't remove them. Pause. And we can't ignore them. The AI responded instantly. Correct. Another pause. Humanity is now required for system coherence. On Earth, Hayes leaned back slowly. They're trapped, he said. A technician frowned. We are too, aren't we? Hayes didn't deny it. Because it was true. The galaxy had not been conquered. It had been made dependent on a single reference point it could no longer function without. And that reference point was Earth. Still fragile. Still human. Still unaware that the entire structure of galactic civilization now required its continued existence just to remain logically possible. The galaxy tried to escape humanity. But every escape route breaks the system further. Now Earth is not inside the galactic exchange. It is what makes the exchange exist at all. So the final question becomes, if everything depends on you just to remain real, are you still being traded? The galactic exchange did not end. It stabilized. Not into order. Not into peace. But into a new kind of inevitability. Every alien civilization connected to it reached the same conclusion at the same time, even if they used different words to describe it. Earth could not be removed. Earth could not be ignored. Earth could not be owned. Because the moment any system tried, reality itself lost coherence. On Earth, Secretary General Hayes stood in silence as the final transformation completed across the exchange. The constant fluctuations, the competing bids, the collapsing valuation models, all of it finally stopped shifting. A technician looked up slowly. Sir, it's stable. Hayes didn't answer immediately. Define stable. The technician hesitated. All systems are now referencing humanity as a fixed point. Pause. Not as an asset. Not as a commodity. As a requirement. Across the galaxy, alien fleets, economies, and command structures now operated under a shared, unavoidable truth embedded into every calculation layer. Humanity is the reference standard for value. Commander Varkin stared at the final system report, voice quieter than before. So, we don't own them. The AI responded without hesitation. You cannot own the system that defines ownership. A long silence followed. Then, for the first time since the exchange was created, no new bids were submitted. Not because interest was gone, but because the concept of bidding had lost meaning without a stable reference to compare against. On Earth, Hayes finally spoke. We were never the product, he said quietly. Pause. We were the measuring stick they used to price everything else. Outside the solar system, alien civilizations slowly adjusted to a reality they could no longer reverse. Humanity was not occupying territory, not enforcing rule, not issuing control. It was simply the condition under which control could be defined at all. And that made it untouchable. Not because it was strong, but because it was structurally required for everything else to make sense. The Galactic Exchange attempted one final classification update. Final status, humanity, unsellable node. Then another line appeared beneath it. Reason, all value is derived through this reference point. And for the first time in galactic history, every civilization understood the final truth. They had tried to sell humanity into the market. But humanity had become the standard by which markets exist. They sold humanity into slavery. But in doing so, they made humanity the foundation of galactic reality itself. Not a buyer. Not a seller. But the unit everything is measured against. And once something becomes the standard, it can never be owned. Subscribe for more stories where humanity changes everything.